Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the February 27 meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee. Pursuant to Governor Healy's March 29, 2023 signing of the Acts of 23, extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, this meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee is being conducted in person and by remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 508-945-4410. Again, 508-945-4410 and enter conference ID 698-918-859 #. 698-918-859 #. Or one may join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. This is a live broadcast and simulcast on Chatham TV. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. So with that, let's have a roll call. Kristen, are you here?
I'm here, thank you.
Joanne?
Here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barbara.
Here.
Tracy?
Here.
Tommy?
Here.
I know John Papalaro had a conflict, can't join us. Andy Young?
Here.
And Eric?
Here.
The chairman is here. That's good. We have a quorum, 8 out of 9. Thank you everyone for showing up. Appreciate it. We are going to continue our work on the 2025 budget presentations hearing today from the Monomoy Regional School District and Cape Cod Tech. So Carrie, let me turn it over to you for an introduction if we could, please.
Thank you. So we have Monomoy Regional School District, and who will be presenting is Scott Carpenter, the superintendent, and Michael McMillan, the business administrator. Their budget is at $10.3 million, which includes debt service, and is an increase of $598,000 or 6.16% over the FY24 budget. We also have Erin Orcutt here from Cape Cod Technical School, the business administrator, and their draft assessment for Chatham is estimated at $575,479, an increase of $199,376 or 34.65%. This is due to the increase of students that are going to the school from 7 to 20 students. And I believe that Cape Cod Tech is going to present first.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Erin, welcome.
Thank you very much. I will open up our presentation. Okay, here we are. Thank you. Again, my name is Erin Orcutt. I am the business administrator for Cape Cod Tech, and I am here to present to you our FY25 operating budget. The members of our finance committee are our chairman of our school committee, Mr. Tullio, Mr. Mashad, and Mr. Galatzi. This is a snapshot of Cape Cod Tech's enrollment for FY25. As you can see, we decreased by 2 students for an overall enrollment of 662 students. But what was alluded to is your significant increase here in the town of Chatham. You actually, percentage-wise, had the largest increase throughout our district, moving from 13 students to 20 students. So it was a significant increase in your assessment, but we are really happy to have this level of students from the town of Chatham attending our schools this year. Again, this is a snapshot of our overall enrollment. As you can easily tell, over 50% of our students come from the towns of Barnstable and Yarmouth, with smaller percentages coming from Mashpee, Harwich, and you can see Chatham is 3% of our overall enrollment. Again, here is a quick student enrollment trend. This is showing you a 6-year trend of where enrollments have been. You will see FY20 was a very low of 570 students. But again, we are up now to 662 students. The FY25 budget that I am presenting to you today is a 4.38% increase over our FY24 budget, or $734,000 increase. As you can see, prior to FY24, we did our best to keep our budget under 3%, but these past few years have been more challenging fiscally. Inflation is really driving the costs of a lot of our supplies, insurance, as well as what we call the end of our ESSER funding cliff. This is FY24 is the last year of ESSER funds, and we had to be very creative with some of the things we had created over the past few years in order to keep as much as we could going, as well as minimize the increase overall. So where does the money come from that funds our operating budget? A majority of it's from the assessments from our towns. As you can see, the assessments make up $12,694,000 of our budget, with state aid being predicted to be just under $4 million, and local revenue being $815,000. That local revenue is comprised a very small amount from interest income and facility rental. We have two very strong contracts that we're running with facility rental. One is with the YMCA of Cape Cod, and the other is with our busing company, Cape Destination. So we have probably about $60,000 worth of facility rental that comes in a year. But the rest of that you see is contributions from excess and deficiency. We are currently at our max with excess and deficiency, so we are dedicating $750,000 from excess and deficiency to offset the increasements to the member towns. You will see, even though our increase overall budget is 4.38, we were able to lower our assessment increase to under 2%. A quick comparison of our overall operating budget and what funds it. The blue line is indicating our operating budget. The red is state aid, green assessments, and local revenue is the purple. What you will notice is assessments to our member towns have actually been going down over the past few years. The Student Opportunity Act definitely was an influx of state aid that helped offset that, but again, some strong contributions from our excess and deficiency fund. This is a numerical demonstration, really, of our operating budget versus our revenue sources. But again, as you can see, we have done our best to contribute as much as we can from local revenue or excess and deficiency, as well as more of a cost share shift to the state, offsetting local assessments. So what is the money used for? Everything you would expect to find in a technical school building. Teacher salaries make up over 35%. This is a collective bargaining year. We have settled one contract, our teachers, but we are still in negotiations for all other contracts. So there is more of an inflated number in one of the categories, the administration, where it's 6.1. Some of that COLA reserve is located within that. So that is a little bit of a little thrown off, but we're not able, since we haven't been able to settle those other 4 units, we haven't shifted that provision down to the actually salary lines. You can also see insurance runs about 11.2% of our overall budget. We are part of the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, and happily, well, not happily, but we saw an 8% increase, which was slightly lower than we expected. Adding on support services and transportation, as well as the cost of what it takes to operate the building and to operate our shops, is what brings us to our overall budget of $17,484,000. Capital debt, you can see that we are 7 years into our 20-year fixed principal declining interest bond. My joke is that when this retires, hopefully I can too. But we're going strong. The interest is declining, fixed principal. And that number I typically have for you in December, because it is based strictly on enrollment. Unfortunately, we only arrived at our assessment number a few weeks ago because of its dependency on the state's governor's budget. But again, here you see your capital debt assessment for FY25 is $173,197. We add that to your estimated operating assessment of $402,282 for an overall increase for the town of Chatham of $575,479. So this would be the assessment we would issue for FY25. If our excess and deficiency is certified above the maximum level, we'll again be returning money back to the towns and in the form of credits to your assessments. Another quick share, our OPEB fund is pooled in the Plymouth County OPEB Trust. We have been part of that since 2015. We are working to lower our accrued liability. Right now, we're at a 14.35% funding to liability, which is an increase of about 2% over the past few years. So we're slowly chipping away. We have a funding plan that now going forward, we will put $300,000 into the budget each year until we've met the full funding. And that is the end of my formal presentation.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Questions from the committee? Joanne, can you shout out, since I can't see the visual, as to who's may have their hand up, please?
So far, it's just I, but I'll keep an eye open, Mr. Chair. I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk about excess and deficiency fund. Is that similar to our free cash?
Yes, ma'am.
And where does it come from?
Essentially, it comes from unspent budget or excess revenue in our budget. If we predict our state funding to be lower than what it comes in at, that excess money does go into excess and deficiency. Really what brought us really to the top was part of our bonding for our project. Our then treasurer invested it very wisely. And fortunately or unfortunately, we made over $2 million in interest because of good
Explain
investment.
that, please.
When you take out the bond, when we took out the bond for the building, cash flow issues, we only needed half of that money right away. Our treasurer invested it in a bond, and we made nearly $2 million off of that bond.
Okay.
So that can't go back into the general fund, that gets returned back to our sending towns. So essentially got returned to excess and deficiency and then returned back to the towns over the past 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Andy?
Now, I'm still similar to Joanne's question though. Excess and deficiency, is that set by the state at a certain limit?
Yes, sir.
As
So what it is
percentage?
5% of your operating budget,
Okay, all right.
including your debt service.
Okay, and then within any given fiscal year, if you exceed that, you then create a credit back to the towns.
Yep, the Department of Revenue will communicate with both myself and your town administrator and your finance department directly that you will be receiving a credit, and then it's calculated on a per student basis,
Okay.
credited back to the towns, typically in the first assessment of the following fiscal year.
Okay, all right. Now, I think I understand now. All right, I was wondering what it was based on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No
Joanne,
further,
I've got a question, please.
Yes, sir.
Joanne?
no further
Aaron, thank you
questions
for your-
here.
Thank you, Joanne. Aaron, thank you for your presentation. Just a question, please, on OPEB. I guess your funding ratio is now, what, roughly 14.5%?
Yes.
How much of that is due to how much of that increase is due to the increase in interest rates over the last couple of years? And does kind of the tech administration think the $300,000 is sufficient against a $15 million obligation on a going forward basis, please?
Being part of the Plymouth County OPEB Trust, which I actually sit as a governing member of, we have the investment advantage of investing our money with 40 million other dollars throughout the state. Up until this past year, we've had incredibly favorable returns. That has really contributed to that fund balance is the interest earned off of the investments. But we have made a concerted effort to put approximately 250 to 300,000 in over the past few years.
And does the OPEB trustees of the tech have a kind of a funding horizon? Do you anticipate or hope or aim to defease this obligation after X numbers of years? Or how are you approaching the riddle that is OPEB?
So off the top of my head, I believe we have about 14 more years in our funding schedule. What our plan is to stay at this $300,000 threshold until the Barnstable County Retirement Association's assessment, or until they're fully funded. Hopefully that will happen in 2036, but that's a moving target as well. But our plan is to continue at this rate until Barnstable County Retirement has sunsetted, and then taking that part of our budget and dedicating that to OPEB until it is fully funded.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. So Joanne, back to you.
No questions here, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Aaron, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time. And Carrie, just from a planning perspective, has the select board voted yet on the school budgets?
No, they have not. I believe they're going to be voting tonight on those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Then perhaps we can calendar, and I'm not looking at the calendar that you and I agreed this morning, but perhaps we can put each of these two budgets on our roster for Thursday if we've got the room within the agenda.
Yeah, I have them on Thursday.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, who's next? Scott and Michael, I believe?
Yes, Scott and Michael.
Sure, just to get us started
gentlemen.
off, Scott Carpenter, Superintendent at Monterey Regional, Michael McMillan, our Business Manager, and we also have Dr. Robin Millen, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, sorry. So happy to be here to present the budget that we have put together with our school committee. I think the things to be proud of is, we've got a strong school system. We want to keep it that way. This does go and keep a lot of the same supports that we've had before, the high quality teaching, but we also have a lot of the same challenges that Erin brought up in her presentation. The ESSER funds that we have been relying on as school districts since the beginning of COVID are gone. We also are in the midst of contract negotiations with our unions. And, when we've looked at our salaries and, just what, our employees need to be able to live here on Cape Cod, given, the financial climate that it takes to maintain a house here and raise a family here. We've got that to take into consideration, make sure that we remain competitive there. So there's all of that that's built into this. And there was one other sort of promise that we made from a few years ago. A few years ago, we were struggling to have a viable cohort of preschool-age children to continue to run a preschool at Chatham Elementary. We finally got to the point that we can return an integrated preschool section to Chatham Elementary this year. So that's in the budget. It creates a situation where there's a little higher increase in the assessment because we're bringing back preschool. But I remember a couple years back when we didn't have a viable cohort and I had to send the Chatham preschoolers for integrated preschool to Harwich. And, some were up in arms that we've kidnapped the children from Chatham and sent them to Harwich. It's like, and I said, as soon as we can get a viable preschool back, we'll be bringing it back. So that's built into this budget. Michael will be up there doing the bulk of the presentation. I didn't want to go and have you watch me teetering on crutches and potentially falling off the stage. So I'll turn things over to Michael.
It depends how the conversation goes. I might go for the sympathy vote.
Yeah, and I've restricted him to only the amount of time that Erin took for her presentation.
So I do have like 23 slides, I think. There's a lot of data in there. I'll skim over it, but if you have any questions or you'd like me to go into any more depth, please do ask. So this is, the superintendent was talking about the high-level view we're delivering for students while facing a number of economic financial challenges. The draft budget request is just over $46.5 million, an increase of 4.8% from last year. And that breaks down to the assessments of an increase for a Harwich of 4.9% and for Chatham, 6.2%. And those are higher than the budget increases because we have other offsetting revenue, but that's not increased as much as 4.8%. But I'll go into all that in more detail. So that's the numbers. And just to put that in a little context, this is our budgets since the start of the school district. So this blue line is the total budget for each year, and there's a number in between that shows the increase year to year. So 4.8%, that is on the high side of our budget increases. And though, there have been ones that high before. Back in 2016 was when the debt for the high school, the first debt payment on the high school came online. So that's why you see that big jump. It continued onward since then. And, we had back in FY21 and FY20 and 21 small below inflation increases that I think have put some pressure on future budgets. So this slide just breaks that budget down by major accounts. A major account is a categorization that the state provides to all districts for their finances. So each of the major accounts is listed on the left, and then the FY24 budget is the second column, and FY25 budget is the third column. And the final column provides the change from FY24 to 25, and the shading green means it's a reduction or a low increase through to red, which is the highest increase. So you can see, in this...
Mr. Chair, Barbara has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Joanne. Michael, I noticed, if my figures are correct, the administrative increase is about 7.7%, while teachers is only 2.4%. That probably has something to do with the number of teachers, but why is administration such a high increase?
The 90,000, do you mean that $90,000 increase?
Yeah, 89,027.
Yeah, that's a combination of salaries and all the costs to run the district. So that the administrative costs to run the district. It's relatively small over, the actual dollar amount is relatively small. I'm trying to think, I don't think there's any major items in there. I think it's just a number of different costs, various supply costs and so on that have gone up in the last few years.
So that's not just the salaries of the administration?
It's not just salaries. It's all central office costs, so including, our accountants and, payroll and all those different costs within there. So there's no specific, I'm trying to think if there's a specific item in there. I don't believe so that's driving up. It's just generally all the different costs that have gone up and some assumptions about payroll.
There isn't any added administrative
No.
staff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so the biggest cost is benefits. We talked the health insurance. We are seeing 8% increase in health insurance, and that's factored in there. And that's the biggest increase. That's the biggest increase in benefits has been for a number of years. And then also, teachers and guidance and other teaching services. So that really reflects assumptions around the negotiations we're currently in for a new contract with teachers. And I'll go into more detail on all that shortly. And we are seeing reductions in some areas. So there's programs with other districts, which include school choice. And we do have some savings or just reduction in costs in IT as well this year. So this is a bit repetitive because some of these items are come up again. Health insurance, obviously, they're increased there. We do have some additional items that we're hoping to purchase or increase in order to keep pushing the priorities of the district forward. We are looking to increase our capital and debt, and I'll go into more information on what that's involved, but that's $300,000. And our maintenance, so just the ongoing maintenance of our buildings, particular HVAC costs at the high school and at the middle school. We are experiencing the same things you do in your homes where trying to get somebody to come out and maintain our buildings is more and more expensive, and they need more and more work. Particularly, we've had the high school, which is our most complicated building because it's the newest one. It's now 10 years old. I know that you would like to think these machines will run forever. Some of them are running, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and that is wear and tear is starting to cost more and more money to maintain, but also at the middle school. And so there's two other issues that I wanted to highlight. So the ESSER funding, so that's the federal funding we received to support school districts during COVID. We received some $2.2 million, and some of that was used for positions. So we have teachers providing academic intervention, as well as social and emotional learning supports. And that funding is coming to the end at the end of this year. So those positions are moving into the general fund, and that's part of the budget increase. At the same time, we are in the middle of contract negotiations with our teachers and our two other units. And we have made some assumptions about what those increases will be. And we also are planning to make some reductions in the number of staff we have, particularly in the elementary and middle school levels, where we're seeing a fall in enrollment. And so we're reflecting that with the reducing numbers. So I've kind of rolled all that in, and that's the net increase, because that includes kind of some increases in costs, but also savings from reducing the number of staff.
Andy, question?
Excuse me, the federal ESSER positions,
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall the conditions under which those grants were made. Did it include that you had to make those positions permanent, or was it, strictly up to the district to decide whether you wanted to continue with them after the funding
Yeah,
ran?
it's strictly up to the school district. So it's one of these things where we have these needs, and so the federal government provided us funds to help meet those needs. And, it's challenging, but because when you're setting them up that the funds are not going to last forever, but we needed to meet the needs of the students at that time, particularly providing academic supports after the school closures during COVID, and also social and emotional needs for the students as they come out of that. But we had the plan, I think we may have presented that last year. The plan was, we knew enrollment was coming down, and we knew that would be able to reduce positions that were enrollment driven, and that would help to offset the costs of those other positions.
Do you envision those particular needs, having been met for some period of time, or
So
on a continuing basis? Or?
Yeah, so what I've seen, people have estimated the impact of COVID being at least 10 years. So, long enough that it'll all come out in the water, because then other factors will influence whether or not we need to continue those positions, including long-term enrollment trends. But I do think we get this 3-year funding for a 10-year at least problem.
Right.
So, and I think it's going to be ongoing.
And I think that's why what you see here is that we had to absorb, there were some of these positions that we added during ESSER, so like an example, we added a school nurse when COVID was at its peak. COVID's died down. We don't need that school nursing position. But what we've seen on the other side of COVID is there's a lot of dysregulation when it comes to children across grade levels. We need to keep in place some of the emotional support people that we hired during ESSER, because while the money's gone, the need is still there. And the conversation that we were having a year ago, if you were to play the tapes back, when we came before both select boards and our school committee and the finance committees, we were talking about sort of a plan that we know that our enrollment is slowly coming down. We have these class size guidelines ever since we formed as a district, where we try to staff our elementary schools to have classes that are 18 plus or minus 1, and our middle school, high school at 19 plus or minus 2. And let's make sure that we really look at our class sizes and staff within those guidelines that we've always been in, to absorb the ESSER positions that we think we need to provide the services that kids need post-COVID, given that some of the challenges are going to last the decade that Michael was saying.
Thank you.
Scott, Scott or Michael or Stephen, Daniel, I've switched over to my telephone since I had my reliable audio fail remotely. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
So I guess my question is, and Michael has alluded to it, but can we put some specificity around what the extra positions are that are going to be transitioned into the regular budget on a going forward basis, please?
What the positions are? Yeah, so we have 9 positions
broad-
right now.
broad-
So we have 9 positions at the moment, and we have a mental health coordinator, we have 2 counsellors, 3 math interventionist positions, a special education teacher, and 2 pre-K positions, a teacher and an instructional assistant that have been added.
Thank you.
That's 9.
And the pre-K, to understand how that ties into COVID and a pandemic, children are identified for early intervention preschool at pediatricians and in their in different preschool settings. And during COVID, when there were less trips to pediatricians and less children going to preschools, there were fewer children that were identified as having needs. So what we've seen as a school district is we came out of COVID with a bumper crop of children who had early intervention needs that had been unmet during the pandemic. So we've been catching up. Our hope is that that within the next year we will have caught up, and that the number of children getting early intervention supports is back to what it was pre-pandemic. But we're still in the process of catching up with unmet needs that youngsters, really young kids had prior to or during the pandemic itself.
So it's not all bad news. Any more questions? Shall I continue?
Carry on.
So it's not all bad news. So there is, the green means good. So we do have some areas where costs are going down. And one of those is in school choice tuition. So that's for students who live in Harwich or Chatham but choose to attend schools out with Monomoy, public schools out with Monomoy. So we have been doing over the last few years a great job in keeping students in the district. So they are attracted by the high quality instruction and the activities in their schools and choosing to stay in the district instead of leaving. And so at the most recent peak in 2018, we had 223 students choosing to take the exit through the school choice program. We're now down to 77 for 2024. So I think that's a great indicator. So that gives us a lot of encouragement about the programs are doing what we want them to do, and also saves us a lot of money. So there was a $260,000 reduction in the budget.
Question, please. Your school choice student, does that explain to us who pays his or her tuition? Does it come from the amount per student?
Yeah, so the state sets nominal, I think it's around $5,000, a few $100 per student.
That's guaranteed from the original.
From the sending town, and basically it comes through the state. It all comes through the state. So
Part of school reform back in the 90s.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to carry on. So the number of students who are coming into Monomoy from other districts has not reduced, and that's partly because we've really carefully managed the number of students so that they are a benefit to the district and not a net cost, and also because we continue to be attractive to students from other districts and they want to come into our schools. So we're managing to keep continuing to attract students and keep the students who live here.
I'm sorry, but explain to me one more time. I get
Yeah.
what the state sends, the 5,000 plus, but does that student bring what its original town would have had to spend on it
No.
with it, or?
Just that $5,000.
Okay.
It ranges between $5,000 and $6,000, depending on some other. They also include an amount for special education. If
So
the
that
student has an IP,
becomes
but-
Monomoy's expense per student?
Yes, and so that's why we carefully manage that cost. So we don't, we have more students asking to come into the district than we accept, because what we've sought to do with our strategy is if we have so if you have a class that has spare seats, then we will allow you school choice to fill that up because it's not an additional cost. You already have the teacher. But we won't add a class in order to bring in school choice because that increases your costs because then you have a teacher and their health insurance, instructional aids and supplies. So it's about kind of maximising the return while minimising the cost of additional students.
Thank you, that's helpful. Tracy?
Thank you. I guess that answers sort of my question as to why that's, it says out-of-district tuition
Yeah.
were desirable, but then it's a decrease
Yeah.
of 124.
Because it's, so actually, no, there's two different numbers. So we're talking about school choice tuition right now. The out-of-district tuition, I mean, they sound the same, but, you know, so there are some students who come to Monomoy whose special education needs we're not able to meet in the district. And so we will have agreements with private schools or collaborative community schools that are specialised in meeting those needs, and we pay them tuition. So they're out-of-district schools who we pay to provide the special education needs and education to those students. And so that is a relatively small number of students, and the costs can be high. So small numbers can fluctuate a lot. So this year it just happens to be down. It's not, I don't believe yet, it's part of an overall trend. It's just we've had one student who was expensive, you know, has graduated or left the district and not been replaced, and so the costs are down. So they're you're right, they're very different reasons they're down. They're both down, which is great. One is we are not having to pay other districts to take our students who we could educate, and it's costing us less to educate the students that we are not able to educate outside the district. That makes sense.
Eric?
You mentioned the outflow number of students. What's the inflow on the school choice?
Give me 2 seconds and I can tell you. Try and miss. So we currently have sorry, bear with me. Just open my spreadsheet. So we currently have around 100 student. Oh no, sorry. We have around 250 students. So we did last year. We had 250 students coming into the district, and 77 going out. So net benefit.
And on your out-of-district tuition,
Yeah.
does the state still help somewhat with
Yes. So
your
yes.
special ed students?
Yep, so that's circuit breaker. So the Director of Student Services, Melissa McGuire, they submit all the information on how much we're spending on special education students, and the state reimburses a proportion of that based on the state budget and the amount of costs.
What percentage
So-
are you getting now, usually?
It's supposed to be around 70%. So we're receiving 70% of our, so 70% of the amount above 4 times the per pupil. So, and so we're supposed to get 70%. So recently the state changed it so that they also reimburse a portion of the transportation costs.
Right.
Because transporting students to those locations can be really expensive, and they, until recently, were not part of the reimbursed costs. So they've started to reimburse those. Those are not being reimbursed at 70% yet, but the tuition costs are being reimbursed at around 70%. 77, I think it's 70%, yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you.
And then high school debt, so we just have a debt schedule as Erin presented for the Cape Tech, and the amount we pay back just goes down. The way it's structured, it goes down slightly each year, so that helps to offset our costs. And we have some savings in our IT equipment as well. And so
Michael, a quick question. Stephen here.
Yes.
When do you, what is the scheduled expiry of the construction debt for the school, please?
What was that? I think. So.
The scheduled expiration of the debt, outstanding debt for the
Oh,
construction?
so it's a 25 year, we're in year 9, it's 2040, does that add up? So it's around 2040 that we're due to final payment on the high school.
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
So I just wanted to highlight, over the next couple of slides, a little more, some of the other items we're trying to promote through this budget. And, so last year we developed a portrait of the graduate. So that was a lot of work that Dr. Millen and Superintendent undertake with a community group to identify the attributes that we wanted Monomoy students to have when they graduated. And the idea is that is a guiding star that coordinates all the work that the district is doing from pre-K right through to our senior and our graduates. And that's to develop students who are creative and critical thinkers, who are communicators and leaders, engaged citizens, and independent and confident learners. And so that's what we hope to do with what the charter that you give us to develop those students and the funds you provide. That's what we're going to produce. And so this is what your dollars do. So these, when you vote for this budget, it makes a real difference, and it helps us to deliver excellent work in our school district. And we're in the middle right now of developing a new strategic plan for 2024 through to 2028. And so some of the items that are included in this budget help to promote these priorities and this focus. So these items...
Excuse me, before Barbara.
Thank you, Joanne. Backing up a slide or two, there was something that said that class sizes are being renormed to district guidelines. What were the old class sizes and what are the new ones?
So my first year that when Monomoy formed is when we developed and shared with the school committee class size guidelines of at the elementary 18 plus or minus 1 as a classroom average across an elementary school and 19 plus or minus 2. During COVID, we allowed classes to get smaller just by virtue of what we were trying to do during the pandemic. And now that we've emerged from the pandemic, we're going back to those class size guidelines and bringing them back into place. I suspect when you look at like a Chatham Elementary School, when you have, let's say, 2 sections and they're both at 17, it's not like you can look at the 2 sections and say, oh, can I combine them into one class of 34? It wouldn't make sense. But at Harwich Elementary School, where we do have more than just 1 or 2 sections per grade level, I think we have to look at the class size guidelines and say, okay, can we contract some of the number of classes we have so that we're back within that class size guideline, and particularly also at the middle school. So, so again, it's keeping classes small and supportive, but returning to sort of pre-pandemic, the guidelines that we were using pre-pandemic.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. So let's see. So these are some of the new items which we've included in this budget as requested by our administrative team, including focus on continue to invest in our ELA curriculum. There's also on social studies textbooks. There's also there's 2 additional positions, or not additional positions, but increasing the FTE. We've got part-time positions providing special education, sports and services, and the needs of our students mean that we have to increase those, each one by 0.2. So it's a speech and language pathologist and a physical therapist, increasing each of those in order to meet the individualized education program plans of our students. We're also...
Excuse me a moment,
Yes.
Barbara.
I'm just wondering, what do equity instructional leaders do?
So one of the requests we'd had, so the items that are not shaded are what is included in the budget, and the ones that are in grey have not been included in the budget at this time.
Oh,
But
okay.
but they would, that were about, so the diversity and equity and inclusion program at the school district. One of the principals, I believe, had requested that we have leaders to help implement that and to ensure that all students are receiving the services and education that they need, but that's not been funded at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
And, so the last 3 items in the white section that are funded, it's about professional development, and that's about ensuring we have high quality instruction in the classrooms. That's what keeps the students staying, under the school and brings more in under school choice. and ensures that we're able to deliver on the strategic plan and get those students to where they should be by the time they graduate.
Tracy?
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the best time to ask,
It's
but I
all
was
good
thinking
time.
it would be something that would occur in a line item on this level. As a parent of a dyslexic child,
Yep.
I've studied somewhat about literacy and early literacy, and he had been undiagnosed for a long time. But I know more about it. I don't know, so forgive me if Massachusetts has a totally different set of guidelines, but Governor Hochul in New York just recently changed their guidelines for literacy instruction from balanced literacy to science of reading, like the more phonics-based. But that seemed to also correspond with the need for retraining teachers.
Yeah. Yes.
And that would be an expense, I don't know if paid by the state or if Massachusetts was staring at that same thing coming up.
So I will say, so that's definitely way outside my area of expertise. That's why Dr. Millen's here. I would say that we, over the last couple of years, have invested a significant amount of money in a new ELA curriculum that has been implemented at the elementary schools and has helped to improve reading and literacy throughout the elementary school. But to your specific question, Dr. Millen is here.
And while Dr. Millen's getting up to the mic, we also earlier today had a administrative meeting and where we were looking at that strategic plan, looking forward over the next 4 years for the school district. Early literacy and just literacy across the board is one of those key components that, we fully acknowledge. And, I'll turn things over to the good doctor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Robin Millen, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment for the district. So yes, you're right. So in the last year or so, Massachusetts has just put in new dyslexia guidelines, and it is a mandate that we have that we've put into place. They don't right now require us to teach in a certain way, like New York does, but they are supporting science of reading instruction. So that, and this is a big change in Massachusetts. This is not something that they had done years ago, like some of the other states, like Connecticut and things like that. And I just haven't, this is not, I did not know you were gonna ask me this, but this is a program right now that our district is involved in. It's the Massachusetts Dyslexia Institute. We have a group of administrators, teachers, special educators, interventionists, delving into this to see how we can best support our students, first of all, but then our teachers and our instruction. We also are paying for an increase of early literacy professional development right now through Hill Literacy, which is teaching the science of reading to all of our teachers as well. And that is a 5-year strategic goal of ours, to get all of our teachers through that so that they understand the importance of that type of reading instruction now. But this is a brand new thing coming on Massachusetts just within the last year, where they actually, I always say, and this is not necessarily nice, but we can say the D word now, which we weren't able to say before, that dyslexia is something that we need to be understanding and doing for our instruction and our students. But it's good for all students. Okay, so we'll do this later today, 3 to 5.
All right, and then my next slide is so around the capital and debt projects that we have planned for the district. So there's a number of items here, and one just to highlight Chatham Elementary School. We had started a couple of years ago, and we want to continue replacing carpet in some of the classrooms with tiles. And then the other one I wanted to highlight at the middle school, we would like to start a project would like to replace the siding and trim at the middle school. We like the building a lot, but it's starting to look its age. The siding and trim has not been replaced in over 20 years, and the air and the sea salt and the sea air has taken its toll, and that's allowing, it's not just unsightly, it's also allowing water into the building, which is, undermines the integrity of the structure. So we want to get that sorted. And then we also just have the ongoing payments on the high school debt. This is a little non sequitur, but I just wanted to get it in somewhere. Was that a question? No.
Yeah, Michael, it's Stephen again.
Stephen.
Can we go back to the prior slide, please?
Yes.
So in last year's presentation, there was a roster of projects that was going to be required at the elementary school over the next several years. I think it footed to something around $2+ million, perhaps as much as $2.5 million.
Yeah.
Do you have kind of a twinning slide to last year, so Chatham as an entity can see what it's gonna be on the hook for?
Yeah,
Over the next several years with this?
Yeah, I do not have that in this slide pad, but I can send that along. Essentially, the biggest number at the elementary school is the replacement of the roof. And so we do have
Right.
included on this slide, we do have the middle school roof. So we've separated it, we're doing one at a time. So we're trying to do the middle school roof first, and then we would do the elementary school roof. And we're applying to the Massachusetts School Building Authority for a grant to help fund replacement of the middle school roof. But we need to get into that program first. And once we're accepted in, next year would be, if we were accepted in, next year would be sort of the initial study and procurement, and then the following year would be construction, and that would all be offset by funds from the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And then we would turn to the elementary school.
And is my understanding correct that under the recently renegotiated
Yes.
regional, Chatham has carriage for those costs at the elementary school?
Yes, you're right. So we would have to, 100% of those costs would be borne by the town of Chatham, and as the town of Harwich bears 100% of the costs of at Harwich Elementary School. So I would say we will not, this is not how you would find out we were going ahead with a project like this. We would be much more, we will come and talk to you, before we make any application, before we do anything like that, so you'll have every opportunity to decide if that is something you want to go through with.
Understood and appreciated, but if nevertheless we could get that roster of capital projects on a forward basis, I'd be grateful, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So the next slide, this was just, inflation. We're dealing with it. It's putting pressure. It's, we are directly increasing our costs, or has over the last couple of years. And although it is down, inflation is still at high, around 3.5–4%. And that not only does that impact us directly, but it also impacts our staff, and that impacts, and I'm going to come on to, their living costs and their expectations and needs around salary. And so that impacts us indirectly as well.
A question on the inflation cost. You're basing your FY25 budget based on your assumption of what in the cost of inflation?
So I don't, to be honest, I look at the trend really. So we don't build in, I don't make a conscious decision about a certain level of inflation. We look at what our costs have been over the last couple of years, our actual expenditure. So when it comes to supplies, I look at what expenditure has been over the last few years and then reflect that in next year's budget. Does that make sense? So it's slightly less scientific than you might like, but it more is reflecting what we're spending, what we're expecting to spend this year, and that's how we decide what next year's budget is going to be. We do, so...
I'm trying to figure out how you make that decision. You say you expect to increase it a certain amount. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
So no, I'm not. So basically, so when I show this, that's driving up our costs. So the way that influences the budget is that when we look at our expenditure, we say our expenditure is higher. And so when we're setting the budget for next year, it reflects our current expenditure, which has increased because of inflation.
I see.
Rather than us building an inflation factor, we don't do that.
Right.
So we just reflect our actual costs, but our actual costs are going up because of inflation. Does that make sense?
All right, thank you.
I mean, it's also indirect, but when we are developing, one way we develop the budget is the principals have to go and see what they want to buy and how much they think it's going to cost. And so when they're looking at prices online or they're looking at quotes for things, those reflect inflation and those have increased. So we're actually always a bit behind this because we feel it and then we add it to the next year's budget.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about staffing as well. That's the biggest part of our budget. It's around, I think all of our staffing is around 50%, 60% of our budget plus benefits. So it's a huge part of our costs. So what this chart is, it breaks down different types of employees. This is all our staff positions, and we report to the state. This is based on an October 1st report we make to the state every year, so we have a consistent measure of different types of staff. So you can see since 2019, our staffing has come down slightly, although increased over the last couple of years, and really that's those ESSER positions, as well as providing additional special education supports for students. There are a couple of areas I just wanted to highlight. One is our instructional staff. So you can actually see instructional staff, that's the big blue part, and it's the second line from the bottom. And that has gone down over the last few years by a few, not a lot, by a few students. And that really reflects enrollment. So we have slightly less classroom teacher need, but where you see increases is in the special education support staff, instructional support staff, which includes physical therapists, occupational therapists. So although we are seeing our enrollment go down, and that is reducing our need for general education staff, we are seeing the needs of our students are increasing, and that is driving an increased need for other types of staff, including additional support staff and paraprofessionals slightly as well. I will just say this is just a moment in time of the people in the building at the time the survey is taken. So where we have positions that are not filled, these are not included here, and we have had 3 instructional assistant positions that have not been filled all year because we just can't find the staff. So our need is actually slightly greater than is up here.
Tracy, question.
Oh, I left my speaker on, sorry. I guess question about like special education staff.
Yes.
And keeping in mind what Scott had said about sort of the backlog of need coming in at the early age,
Yeah.
you know, after COVID and more services needed for students.
Yes.
Is there some sort of projection, not that you guys would be responsible for that projection, but statewide or nationally, that these needs are going to continue to increase, or that there'll be a stabilization?
Yeah, so we are aware of that possibility, and it's something we've talked about in the administrative team. It's like, okay, so we know we have an issue in pre-K right now because we have higher numbers, but those students will come into the kindergarten and they will be with us hopefully for the entirety of their career education. So how are we going to make sure we support them? So that's how what our discussions have been. I've not seen any broader or wider research, but we are aware it's there, and we will continue to support those students.
And again, you know, even if we just focus on pre-K, you know,
Yeah.
we were hoping that we would be able to see a decrease in pre-K, that sort of unmet need of earlier intervention, we would have caught up to it and be on the other side. But again, we're now having to build what was an ESSER position into the budget to meet those needs. So it's.
So there wasn't like a dip back down?
Yeah, so we haven't seen the dip back. And, you know, and the reality is, like, I've been in the game now a long time. I was a lot thinner and a lot less gray when I first became a superintendent and administrator. And if you look even at some of the miraculous advances that we've had in science, you know, there are miracle babies that sometimes need a lot of supports in school that, you know, that if I go to the front side of my career, you know, science wasn't able to go and, those children didn't exist. But now, because of technology, they can.
Right.
We see a whole lot of different changes that are happening, so whether or not this early intervention is a factor of COVID, is it a factor of COVID and just other aspects of our society, or with medicine, it's there, and it's a little scary if you project forward.
Well, that
given-
was, sort of my next question is, we know that we have this higher concentration in our younger students right now. So when we're looking towards the future, I would imagine that supports only become more expensive as a student ages, right? It's much more expensive to provide academic support to a high schooler than it is to a kindergartner.
Yeah, and I think the hope, too, is that providing those early intervention services, that you can have children get what they need early on and get off of needing that additional support. And, you know, I'm not only a superintendent, but I'm a proud parent of a Monomoy grad who started getting early intervention services in preschool and finished at our high school taking all honors classes, finished 7th in her class with straight A's. You know, that's you know, sort of what you ideally want to be able to see, is that children get what they need early on and are able to go and fly on their own down the road.
All right.
Carry on.
Michael, Stephen, just follow up if I could.
Yes.
How do you treat open budget lines, open positions at the end of the fiscal year, please?
How do we manage open positions? Open positions, if they're still at, so if we've
Well,
identified.
how do you, from a financial perspective, how do you treat them? If you're unable to fill a position over the course of a fiscal year, what happens to that funding and what happens to that position?
So the funding, so at the end of the year, if we haven't filled a position and those funds haven't been transferred for some other purpose, then essentially that flows into our excess and deficiency. So that's a surplus that goes into excess and deficiency and then can be used to offset future budgets. So that's the sim. In terms of what we do the following year, I mean, well, there's two things. One is this is not an experience we've had a lot of in the past. Normally we're able to fill positions. So we don't really have a standard procedure of what to do if we just can't fill a position. Especially some of the positions we're struggling to fill are positions that are required in order to meet individualised education plans for special education students. So we can't not keep trying to fill those positions. Although we did have a conversation at our admin team today about, like, can we think about, you know, how we might use our staff differently or look for more, you know, train our staff so they can help to cover students in a more efficient way. But we're just starting to think about that. So, I mean, the short answer is, if I have an open position that I still need, and even though I'm not going to be able to fill it, the plan is to keep it open next year and keep trying to fill it and see if we can fill it. Of course, that can't go on forever.
And you can also imagine, I'm sure on the town side, they face this with certain positions, you know, so I think Michael had mentioned that, you know, that we have had, you know, at least 3 unfilled instructional assistant positions, and the instructional assistant positions are dictated by special education plans, and they provide students some additional special education supports in addition to their teachers. But if you can't fill, if there's a labor shortage out there, you have to go and look at, are we paying enough? You know, which all gets wrapped into the contract negotiations and everything else. So it's complicated.
Which brings me beautifully onto my next slide, so teacher salaries, that we've mentioned it multiple times, that's a big driver of the budget this year because we are in negotiations with our union in order to develop a new contract for the next 3 years. And when we first started this process, as we do each time we begin negotiations, we did analysis to compare where our salaries are compared with the salaries of the districts around us. So this chart, affectionately known as the Christmas tree, because we did it in December, we started by identifying a number of steps and columns. So the way, just to back up a little bit, our staff are paid on a grid where you get a step for each year of experience through to 16 years, and you get a column based on your level of education, which you can develop throughout your career. And so we kind of drew a line as if somebody started on the lowest step and column and worked their way through to the top step and column, ended up with a doctorate on step 16. So we identified a kind of number of those positions and then compared them to the districts around us. So for each column you then have, so you have the step in the column, and then say NOSIT, we compare step 1 bachelors, which is what B stands for, to how much NOSIT are paying. So if it's red, that means they pay more than us, and the amount more they pay for us is the number in that column. If it's green, then it's, and then down arrow, then we're paying more than them, we're paying, because they're paying less than us, so we're paying more than they are. Not everybody reimburses health insurance at the same percentages, so we included some assumptions around health insurance. But as you can see, there's a lot of red. So what we're finding is staff can go to other districts nearby and get paid more for the same experience and qualifications. And that's real. We are experiencing that when we start interviewing as we start through the summer or in the run up to the summer and looking into next year. We'll be interviewing people who have offers from multiple school districts. And at the end of the day, it's really hard to persuade them to come. No matter how good Monomoy is, it's very hard when they're going to get paid more money 10 minutes down the road. And our staff know this, our existing staff and our employee or associations know this, and this is the information they're presenting back to us now as we're in employee negotiations, and that's driving up a higher cost of living increase for our staff.
Did you say that those figures include the salary and the benefits?
Yes.
Health benefits?
Yeah, I made assumption. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell because not everybody takes health insurance, but most of us have similar plans because almost all these districts, I think, are on the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, so we're all paying the same plans, but they have different percentages. So we have we pay 70 and 70-30 split. I know Barnstable's 50-50 at the moment, and so some of the splits are different. So I reflected a kind of assumption around that difference in here. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And if we were to, sort of go back in time 10 years ago, this would have looked a lot more green than it does today. So in fact, when we came together as Monomoy, the Chatham Public School teachers got paid significantly more than the Harwich Public Schools teachers. So we were equalizing those salaries early on. But Monomoy was sort of like on paper, one of the more desirable districts to go to financially for an employee. We've lost that, and one of the things we have to look at is how do we get back to having this look far more green and less red?
Tracy?
How did it get more red? I ask as somebody who believes that, the value of teaching and paying teachers well is incredibly important to me. And it sort of makes me sad to think that this many other school districts are paying their teachers better than we are.
So, and some of this is a factor of who closed contracts post-COVID. So Mashpee, which is in the middle up there, that is significantly more, they did some aggressive moves in their contract negotiations that closed this last year to go position them to get that, we'll call it inexpensive first-year teacher that you can then grow over the years. So we're now needing to go and look at what's the playing, what's the marketplace out there, and do that marketplace adjustment. And I know full well that our towns are having to do that same thing with different different jobs on their end.
I mean, I think a lot of it's just that timing. So when we agreed our last contract, it was in the middle of COVID, and we didn't really know what impact it was going to have on town finances. We thought everything was closed. So we had a relatively low increase in our last contract, and so we kind of fell behind. I think that's partly the problem. But when I come back to that red circle with the hundreds of $1,000s increase, that's partly going to help to catch us up and keep pace with our neighbours. But it's going to be a moving target because they're going to be in negotiations soon as well.
Barbara?
Sorry, Mike.
Do you have any idea what the rest of the state looks like in terms of teacher salaries?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we do. And I mean, this is a relatively good, I think, this is a relatively good comparison. The state's, it's all over the place. You've got high cost neighbourhoods and towns that pay much more. And then you've got, when you go out to the west of the state, then the rates are generally lower.
Because it seems to me a slide or two from now, it looks like our per pupil cost is in the top third of the state. And if we're not paying our teachers as well as many of the other schools, what is increasing our per pupil cost?
I mean, I definitely think, so there's two things. One is, I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think you're right. The Cape is a more expensive area. So I think on average, probably the Cape is a little higher than the rest of the state combined. you know, we are a smaller district, so if you've got a big district, then, you know, your business manager is spread over more students, and so that being small increases your per pupil costs. So like the top, in terms of per pupil, the top schools are like Provincetown and Truro and Orleans because they're just smaller, and so those costs are split. So that's definitely a factor, and I think we are, and I think we're conscious of it. We think we can reduce the number of staff. So we have so that's driving, you know, that is increasing our per pupil. If we're about to reduce the number of staffs, number of positions, then that will help to reduce our overall per pupil.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, were you trying to get our attention?
I was trying to ask a question, and quite simply, I guess it's a twofold question, Scott or Michael. I guess first would be if you had to prognosticate what the Christmas tree looks like after your next contract, how much more balanced or favorable to the district would it be? And B, how much political pressure do you guys feel as administrators responsible for a budget, responsible for educating the children of this district, to keep the numbers in check and not get too green relative to this chart?
You know, if I look at it, I think that we have iterations of this that, you know, that we've developed based on when you go into negotiations, say, okay, if we do this, what does it do to the Christmas tree? And, you know, so we run through those, scenarios. So our hope is that we come out of negotiations and have something that provides, we'll say, more green, but behind that, you have to keep in mind that it's hopefully providing our teachers a salary to allow them to live and raise families here in our towns, in our region, which is challenging now. And, you know, so I think there's, you know, I think there's pressure that you hear from your staff. I think there's pressure that I put on myself, and I'm sure that Michael and Robin are in the same place where, you know, where we want to do right by our staff.
Yeah.
But I also think that yesterday we presented to the Harwich board, you know, Stephen, and that was I think the most welcoming reception that we got, and we were very clear that, you know, behind this budget is an attempt by the school district to help, help our staff, you know, be able to go live and have a salary that is, you know, is akin to the neighboring districts. And I think their board, you know, the Harwich board, you know, heard that, you know, so I think there's support in both towns to see us doing right by our employees, just like I know that on the town side, you want to do right by your employees. This is a tough, you know, housing market to be in. You need to do right, or who's going to be left working here? And you know, at the same time, you know, I can imagine when it comes to the select board and the finance committee, you want to be doing right by the folks that live here, because the families that go to our schools need to be able to afford to live here and raise families and send their kids to Monomoy or Cape Tech.
Eric?
Staying on the Christmas tree, I'm sure there's a wide range of different teachers in different steps through the full range of the steps. Is there kind of a cluster of the average teacher in certain steps, or groups of those?
Yeah.
Or, you know, where are the main bulk of the teachers that we have?
So the main bulk of the teachers are in the last couple of steps. So step 14 particularly, because you have to wait at step 14 for until you've been with the district for 15 years before you can move to step 16. So if you arrived here after, if you've been arrived here and went on to step 10, then it takes you another 15 years to get to step 16. So as again, we have this bottleneck where people bunch up around step 14. And so we are looking actually, so that's it.
And,
Yeah,
and I-
so we're more green in that area, right, already.
Which is partly why, yeah.
Yeah, and to also put it into some global context in terms of how complicated and interconnected the challenges are. When we have an opening these days, it's tough to hire a bachelor's or a master's step one teacher. They come in, we make an offer, they try to figure out how to make that offer financially work on the Cape. And a lot of times, and they may come back, they say yes initially because who wouldn't want to live in Chatham or Harwich, okay? And then you get a call back a few days later and it's a no. And the person who is able to say yes oftentimes is somebody who's more mature in their career, who may have inherited their parents' house in Chatham or Harwich or Brewster, and would love to come to the Cape to kind of close out their career. And again, so we've got a situation that we at times disproportionately have to hire, who's saying yes in the pool based on can that prospective employee look at the financial offer that you're putting out there and say, oh yeah, I can make this work.
So Scott, to be clear, Stephen, to be clear, you're drawing a direct line between your ability to attract and retain the professionals you hope to do so with the challenges of attainable and affordable housing in the district?
Yeah, I think it's very much interconnected. In fact, even like my meeting before coming here was with one of the focus groups that the town of Chatham was having on housing. And, again, it's the themes that were being raised in that focus group are very much what I'm saying. And I think that what we've all heard, and it all is complicated and interconnected and works its way back to, the salary grid and, what are you paying? And can you pay your family, your employees to be able to work and live here? Can our families afford to stay and continue raising their family here, or do they need to look elsewhere?
That's helpful. Thank you.
Go, carry on.
All right, thank you. So just a couple more slides providing some context. So this is our enrollment by grade and by town. This is actually FY23 data, but it's a similar-ish picture for this year. So what you have for each line is a grade, starting from pre-K in the bottom up to grade 12 and beyond at the top. And the blue is Chatham number of Chatham students, and orange is Harwich, so number of Harwich students. So there's a couple of points to make on this slide. One is you can just see how much it varies between grade to grade, what the numbers are by student, and that impacts on the assessment calculation, because it's that assessment calculation that determines, the foundation enrollment, the enrollment split that impacts the assessment at the end of the day. But the other point to note is if you look at the kind of average size in the lower grades, it's much smaller than in the upper grades. So if this trend continues, then you're going to see enrollment go down overall. So unless we start to see some bigger enrollment in kindergarten and first grade, then in the next few years, we're definitely going to see a reduction. So in the next few years, what's in, 2, 3, and 4, or 3, 4, and 5 will move into the middle school. So that will be the new middle school enrollment, and that's going to be lower. So for FY23, the average, I can just cut to FY24, the average for kindergarten through 9 is 99 students per grade, whereas 6 through 12 is 122 students per grade. So just thinking about looking ahead is what we expect to see in the years ahead. It looks like we're going to see this ongoing drop in enrollment.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So this is just so you get a picture of, this is total expenditure, all funds by major account. There's just a couple more trends to point out here. We've seen debt go down because as a share of the overall budget, debt has gone down. Teacher salaries, as I mentioned before, because we've seen an increase in other types of staff, need for other types of staff, and school choice is that part of programs in other districts. And two areas where we're seeing they're taking up more of the budget, that's in operations and maintenance. So maintaining our buildings is costing more and more, and it's taking up a bigger part of our budget. And transportation, so we've just seen an increase. To be honest, I think we needed to pay staff. I mean, we come back to all these recruitment challenges. We've had to increase salaries for bus drivers, and the cost of fuel has also increased. So I just had two more slides. I just wanted to put our budget in the context. So this shows it per pupil you mentioned before. This is our per pupil for all districts in the state, and they're kind of ordered from, each district has a line, and it goes from the lowest per pupil to the highest at the right. And in FY22, Monomoy was ranked 114th, so that's us right there. And then you can see some districts around us. So I think that is a great place for us to be. I think we're paying, that means we're investing in our students. We're not away, we're not investing too much, but we're investing, as much as we need to deliver the services that our students need. When you take into account that we are a little smaller, we are living in an expensive part of the state, I think that's a good place to be. And actually, if you look back to FY14, it's very similar. I mean, there's fluctuations, which you would expect. This was a little higher. And actually, FY23 data has just come out, puts us around a 93rd, I think, in the state at the moment. So we're staying around that same place. And I think that shows that we are spending the money in line with other districts and where we would like to be. And okay, so that was all kind of expenditure, and then over the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about how we're paying for it, in particular how your assessment comes out. So in terms of revenue, state and other revenue, that's 3.8%, and that's Chapter 70 funding and a couple others, which I'll show you. Regional transportation, as a regional district, we get funds from the state to reimburse us for our transportation costs, and those are actually down slightly. Excess and deficiency, that's the amount we use from our kind of free cash. We've kept that at $800,000. And as a result of those items and the overall budget, the Harwich assessment is an increase of 4.9%, and Chatham assessment is an increase of 6.2%. So just take a moment there to explain why Europe is up a little more than in the past. So one reason is reopening that pre-K section here. So that adds about $89,000 to the budget, plus an increase in health insurance. And there was also just a slight increase in health insurance for Chatham staff. A couple of staff who didn't have it last year have it this year, and unfortunately, because you're starting from a relatively low base, fluctuations like that can have an impact. The percentage of students in the district, the 3-year average of percentage of students in the district actually swung over to a Chatham really slightly, but that increased the transportation assessment for Chatham, as did, we have some capital. We have that $40,000 worth of capital. So last year you didn't have any specific capital at Chatham. This year we have $40,000, and so that also impacted that assessment. So all those kind of numbers add up to give you that, higher than previous year's increase. Sorry, I'm going
The regional transportation, how is the state doing with its contribution to us? Is it fulfilling what our wishes, or?
So a couple of things about that. So I mean, they are reimbursing a portion of our transportation. There's two things that have impacted this. One is that I'm just using the very first number. So this is the first state budget we have, and what I've heard is that this transportation number might go up, the reimbursement to us might go up in future drafts of the budget, state budget. This is just what we have at the moment. The other thing is that the regional transportation is a combination of two things. It's one, how much we think we're going to get this year, and it's any surplus we have from previous years. And we had built up quite a big surplus because we kept underestimating how much we were going to get from the state. We would then get more, and we could use that to offset the following year. Unfortunately, last year that didn't happen. What we estimated we were going to get from the state is pretty much what we got, so we had less surplus. Does that make sense? So that's why we have less surplus to use to offset our budget, and so that's why that's the main reason it's gone down. So the state is continuing to do pretty much what we expected them to do. and
Okay,
hopefully
thanks.
they'll have a little more money.
Any other questions right now? Carry on.
All right, so this is just a bit more detail. That's chapter 70, that's the main funding we get. You know, unfortunately, we are not seeing big increases in funding from the state. We've used, and then we received some money for charter school. That's students who choose to attend charter schools. The state reimburses us slightly for that because they charge us for it, and the transportation aid. So like I say, these numbers might increase as we go into, as we process through the state budget development. The one thing I was going to mention is interest. So we have a treasurer who's been really actively trying to make sure we maximise interest revenue from funds we have. So, and that's really, so that's up 200, that's what it was last year, and we've kept it at $200,000, but it used to be like $15,000, so that's really helped us reduce assessments over the last couple of years. And I really like this slide.
Michael,
Yes,
Michael, quick question before you carry on, please.
of course.
Coming back to the Chatham elementary assessment, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think they went up in some order of magnitude of greater than 50% from $650,000 to 1.05 million, if I'm not mistaken, roughly. You note that the pre-K section has roughly $89,000. Can you enlighten us as to where the incremental cost is coming from?
Yes, so the budget, oh, sorry. So yeah, so the elementary schools, I think what you're talking about is the elementary school budget. So because each town is now responsible for that. So the elementary school budget, I'm just trying to get the numbers. It didn't go up that much. It went up, let me just get it. Sorry, just bear with me a moment. But it went, do I have it here? I have so the numbers went up. All right, just give me 2 seconds. I'll find it. So the elementary school budget this year is 3.8 million. And last year, so somebody remember 3.8 million. And then last year, I want to say it was like 3.6. So I think it went up about $200,000. And that's a combination of a number of things. So really, the reason for the increase in the budget is not because the Chatham Elementary School budget increased that significantly. It's a mixture of things. It's that pre-K 100,000. So I think what you're talking about, I think the $1 million you're talking about is how the assessments have changed compared to how they might have changed had we not changed the regional agreement. So I'll jump ahead actually don't worry, I'll come back to those slides. But this, I think maybe what you're talking about. So the new assessment methodology has Chatham at 10.3 million. If we had stuck to the original methodology, we'd be at 9.2. So that's a difference of $1 million. So, and that's because of more than just the elementary school budget. It's because of the assessment change. So if we go here, so this is district assessment since FY20. So you can see that Chatham assessment is the light blue block. So in FY20, Chatham assessment was down 0.8%. It was then down 2.6%. It was then down 4.2%. And then we changed the regional agreement. And when we changed it, it went up 11.6%. And that was that $700,000 increase we had. And then since then, it went up another 2.1% and another 6.2%. So if we had kept it where it was before the regional agreement changed, so if we'd kept it at the sort of the calculation we were doing prior to FY23, the regional agreement, the Chatham assessment would have continued to stay, it might have gone down or stayed very low. But since then, it's gone up. So you've got this gap, and that gap's going to continue over the next few years. And it's really because, you're paying for all of the Chatham Elementary School, and then your share of all the other costs as well changed slightly, that transportation and capital.
Can you explain the change in assessment for us?
So, yes. So, you mean how the calculation changed?
Yes.
So,
For our viewers, please.
Yeah, prior to the change in regional agreement, so prior to FY22, basically costs were split up based on foundation enrollment. So that was just based on the number of students who live in Chatham as a percentage of the number of students who live in Chatham and Harwich. And that share of foundation enrollment was what determined the assessment pretty much throughout the calculation. What changed was since FY23, what happens is you pay for all the costs of the elementary school, and Harwich pays for all the costs of their elementary school. And the per pupil cost at Chatham Elementary is higher, so you're paying a premium because it's a smaller school. Whereas at a Harwich Elementary School, you know, they've got a principal and you have a principal, and that principal is split over more students at Harwich than at Chatham, so it definitely costs. And before we made this change, Harwich were paying for 3/4 of that premium of keeping Chatham Elementary School where it is. Now they don't pay for any of it, so the town of Chatham pays for 100% of it. Of course, you don't pay for 25% of Harwich Elementary School as well, so it's not all costs, but it is, you know, does increase the assessment.
Tracy?
But other than the elementary schools, the rest of the assessment is still done based on percentage of students for the whole, right?
Yes, yes, but it's percentage. It's not of the whole, so it's grades 5 through 12. It doesn't include the elementary school, so that also changed it a little bit because you have a bigger percentage of those students than you have of all the students, and so that increased that part of the assessment as well. Does that make sense?
Andy, did you have a question? Oh. Okay, carry on.
All right, so I'm actually going to go back a couple of slides. Oh, so this is all this, how we funded the budget since the beginning. So the total is the total budget. The grey line is Harwich's assessment. The light blue line is Chatham's. Then the dark blue line is the state, and the yellow is excess and deficiency. So you can just get a sense. So it's interesting. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, it's interesting. Up until about 19, 20, there wasn't much of a trend between the increases in assessments. You know, sometimes Harwich had a bigger increase, sometimes it was Chatham, sometimes you both did relatively similar. And it was only since sort of FY19, after FY20 on, you started to see that really Chatham is having a smaller or no increase in their assessment, and that's really what precipitated us making the change to the regional agreement. And this is it, just zooming in on FY20 to 25. And this was what really, these numbers are kind of what caused that change. So these two charts, the one on the left is for Chatham and the one on the right is for Harwich. And the orange bar is the minimum local contribution, which is set by the state. That's the minimum amount each town is first assessed before we do any other calculation. And the blue line is the foundation enrollment. And you can see from like FY17, really, you see a gentle decline in the foundation enrollment in Chatham. In Harwich, it doesn't really start until FY20. And when it does, both from sort of FY19 down to FY22 for Chatham, as a percentage of the whole, it's just a much bigger drop. And so that change is what was driving those assessment reductions. And it's kind of Harwich had a slightly bigger drop from FY22 to 23, but Chatham has continued to decline as well. And the minimum local contribution, that does impact the assessment, and as you can see, Chatham's was actually going down from 21 to 22, and although it went up, it stayed relatively steady since FY23, whereas Harwich just keeps going up, and that also impacts the assessment.
Eric?
So just for clarity on that.
Yeah.
So the minimum, I would understand that to mean that even if the percentage calculation driver and the cost of the elementary school number is the blue line.
Yeah.
And if the gold bar is above that,
Wow.
we pay that difference? Or?
Sadly, if only it was that straightforward. It's like, so the minimum local contribution is a number set by the state, which is way below your assessment. So so it's like $5 million here for Chatham, but actually what you've approved and what you've assessed is more like $10 million. But the way the state requires us to calculate the regional agreement calculation, the assessment calculation, is that we first assess each town the minimum local contribution. and then what's left is then assessed using our formula. So as that minimum local contribution, the split of that minimum local contribution block impacts the total assessment to each town. Does that make sense? It's like we have like two blocks. We have the minimum local contribution, and then we have everything else. And the minimum local contribution split is based on based on a bunch of different things, including community revenue and property values. But it's capped, and Chatham is at the cap, so it doesn't really increase year to year. So your share of the minimum local contribution has not increased, whereas Harwich's has, and that impacts the assessments.
And again, that minimum share for the town is based on property valuation
Yes.
and income, is
Yes.
that right?
Yep.
Any more questions? Carry on.
And that's the change, and that's it. So that's me pretty much finished. So that's the budget request and the assessments.
Eric?
So we talked obviously a lot about the change in the funding formula that was made with Chatham and Harwich taking on their own elementary schools. There's certainly been some talk recently, I would say primarily from Harwich, about, again, looking at potential changes. So could you give us an update on what, if anything, is happening at your level or the school committee level for that thought?
So we are not at the moment working on anything to change the regional agreement.
No, and, and the funding, just to kind of have people understand, the change that was made was at least.
Excuse me, can you get a little closer to the microphone, please?
Sure. The change that was made to the regional agreement that was approved by both towns sort of came out of an analysis that I had been doing, because Harwich, I think, was concerned that their costs had gone up or were increasing faster than they thought they should. And the only thing that I could put my finger on from the school district side is the way the regional agreement was written had all schools, including the elementary schools, broken out based on the enrollment percentages. And it was clear that the operating budget per student at a tiny Chatham elementary school was so much higher than the operating budget per student at Harwich Elementary School. So I had brought to the attention of the school committee and the two select boards and the finance committees that here's the one space where we could potentially seek some sort of way to make things more fair, but there have not been any conversations that we've had where somebody's come up with a tangible idea that, beyond that. And again, any of those conversations wouldn't be in my wheelhouse. I can look at our budgets and what the school budgets are. I know that Michael and I were at a Harwich Select Board's meeting. It's all blurring together. Is it earlier this year? Where I think somebody had written an editorial in the newspaper, talking about looking at other fundings or other assessment strategies. And there are a couple, and the emphasis on the word couple, school districts in Massachusetts that came together under different, that looked at different things besides student enrollment. They looked at population of the two towns, or they looked at, property values in the two towns. But again, that's not, when it comes to population of the town, say, from the school side, it's what's our enrollment, property values, that's on, the town side, so I think, the conversation, we were just brought before the Harwich Select Board, and there were some at the Select Board that suggested that this is a conversation that needs to continue, but there haven't been conversations beyond that earlier in the year.
That's me.
I'll refer to our chairman. There are no more questions from the committee right now.
And I think we're in good shape. If there are no further questions from members of the committee, Carrie, anything you'd like to add to the presentation or the proceedings?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can you repeat that?
Anything you would like to add to the presentation or to the proceedings?
Oh, no, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, in
I
that
guess
case-
Mr. Chair, I guess I would have one final question. At the beginning, there was a remark that the economic challenges were big.
Yeah.
And does that mean because of the economy, the rate of inflation, or the resultant of changes and effects of COVID, or all the above?
And so all of the above and contract negotiations are salaries. So that's the
Okay.
other challenge. So that's the triumvirate, the overall inflation and the wider economy driving up costs, the ESSER funding, the COVID funding coming to an end, and our contract negotiations.
And our challenge as the Finance Committee is to aspire to have the best offering, to get the best teachers that we can for our schools, and at the same time be able to understand what the taxpayer can afford, how far can we push that, and what can we expect of our taxpayers that is fair. So interesting, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Tracy?
It just also occurred to me in that conversation that it makes sense that, how would we bring salaries down when we can't, thinking of the Christmas tree
Yeah.
card, when we're not getting the new teacher that's, not that they're any better or any worse. It's great that we have a population of teachers with so much experience, but how to bring down salaries when you can't get entry-level people
Yeah.
is,
Real
hard.
challenge.
Andy?
Mr. Chairman, is there anybody else online who would like to say something? I have no idea.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
Andy, thank you.
But I thought I would inquire.
Okay,
Thanks.
Yep, no. Well, I think that to Tracy's point, there's kind of a virtuous circle here that all feeds, and to Scott's point, that all feeds into itself, whether it's teacher salaries, whether it's housing costs, housing availability broadly, whether it's what the quality and reputation of the school is in terms of drawing families to the district, to our towns. There's obviously a complicated interplay between all those things. And I think at the end of the day, part of the solution is funding, obviously. So Scott, Michael, and Robin, we're grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Michael, if we could be sure to get a copy of that Chatham Elementary Maintenance slide, that would be helpful for us. And if there are no further questions from the committee with respect to the MRSD, then we'll let these good people head out, and we'll talk about our forthcoming schedule. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
Scott,
thank you,
Robin,
guys.
Michael. So for the committee, we've got a meeting on Thursday. We've got 2 meetings next week. Carrie and I have been working through the schedule. We are going to begin to focus on Thursday with a series of budget votes, starting with the CPC articles. Well, not budget votes, but warrant votes, excuse me. And the first question I'd like to ask members of the committee, having had the presentation on the CPC articles, does anyone have any specific questions? We're trying to be efficient with both staff time and volunteer time. So does anyone have any specific questions about any of the specific CPC articles that we either want to get an answer to before Thursday or at Thursday's meeting? So Joanne, I'll let you caucus the room and see what, if anybody, people are saying.
we seem all set here, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so everybody's prepared to move forward on Thursday with votes on the CPC articles? Just to be
Yes.
clear?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. And Carrie, maybe you can just edify us. What Carrie and I went through this morning was populating the rest of a kind of a voting slate. It is, with the greatest of respect, it's the cats and dogs, as I would characterize it, of the warrant. So it's the wood waste reclamation facilities, the various revolving funds. There's a dredging article. There are fixing salaries for town officials. It's kind of that order of stuff. I think we'll tuck into some of the bigger things. Next week, we have to wait for the board to place the articles on the warrant. So our action has to follow them to some degree. The CPC articles are automatically placed on the warrant, so we can move forward with them. But otherwise, we're somewhat beholden to the actions of the select board and their voting protocols. So that's kind of what we got. Eric, I think insofar as your votes are concerned, I've talked to the moderators today. There's really two ways we can approach it. First is that you can abstain since you weren't formally a member of the committee until last week. The second alternative would be that you could go back and look at any of the tapes of any of the meetings if there are certain articles that are important to you, and under the moderator's reading of the law, if you wanted to certify that you watched the meetings, you would be at liberty to vote on any of the articles that were discussed in those particular meetings.
I understand the options.
Yeah, good, thank you. So I think that's what we got. Carrie, anything further on your end?
No, I think I sent you guys the agenda for Thursday, right? Did you
Yes.
see that? Okay, all right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think Thursday, I'd like just a quick overview of the wonderful information Carrie sent about all the articles and the tax rate. But I'm looking at it and studying it, but I'm probably going to have a couple of questions on that. But it's late in the day right now. If we could, Mr. Chairman, wait until, take some time on Thursday to do that.
Yeah, that's fine. We could certainly do that Thursday, or we could wait until we get deeper into some of the bigger numbers around the operating budget, around the school budgets, around the $11.4 million waterfront warrant article, and really see what the impact of the tax rate's going to be. Or we can certainly start with the smaller items.
Okay.
If you want to, I'll leave it to you. So.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, anything further from anyone? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Thank you, Andy. Kristen, in favor?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
And the chair is in favor. We're adjourned. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time today. Good conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.